podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Shock and awe. That's probably the best title line to describe Week 3 in the NFL. A week which saw Jaden Daniels and the Commanders stun the Bengals on Monday Night Football as Jaden Daniels recorded the highest completion percentage of any rookie quarterback in NFL history. The Seahawks, Chiefs, Bills, Vikings and Steelers are all a perfect 3-0. The Rams come from behind to upset the San Francisco 49ers. The Panthers, led by Andy Dalton, win big in Vegas. That's right, the Red Rifle returns to lead Carolina to their first victory of the season, and the Giants pile on the misery in Cleveland. On any given Sunday, any result is possible in the National Football League, and there is no better example than the week we've just seen past. What's going to happen next weekend? Why wait to find out? Let's turn that page and look ahead to Week 4 in the NFL.
Graves on Gridiron with Richard Graves.
Hello, welcome along to the show. This is Graves on Gridiron. I am your host, Richard Graves. It has been a surreal start to the new NFL season. Through 3 weeks, up is down, right is wrong, left is right. Trying to keep your head abreast of some of these games, the results coming in, can be a little bit mind-scrambling at times, but it goes to prove that on any given Sunday, anything can happen. And just to put that into some sort of perspective, through the first 3 weeks of the season, there have been 16 games where one team has entered as a big favourite. By big favourite, I mean the line has them as at least a 5.5-point favourite going into the game. Of those 16 teams, their record is a dismal 2-14 in covering that spread. And of the 16 big underdogs, 10 of those underdogs have gone on to win games outright. So when you consider that Week 3 was the first losing record for the show, we went 1-2 against the line. You put that into some sort of perspective. We're still up through 3 weeks with a 6-5 winning record. Against that backdrop, everything's going well, and we're going to look to improve as we enter Week 4 and look ahead to 3 more games. If you are new to the show, great to have you along for the ride. As I always say, this is about having fun ahead of your big Sunday of NFL action. We've got 3 games each week, and this week's previews start with one of those perfect teams. The undefeated Pittsburgh Steelers are 3-0 heading into Week 4, and now they travel to Indianapolis to take on the Colts, who themselves recorded their first win of the season last weekend by taking down the Chicago Bears. And it's quite interesting because the odds makers reckon this might be decided by the width of a piece of paper. They have the Pittsburgh Steelers as the away team going into Indy as narrow 1.5-point favourites. Why is that, you might ask, when they're undefeated this season? Well, it's because their offence gives pause for thought. They're only averaging 17 points a game on offence this season, with Justin Fields, their newly acquired quarterback, playing sound football, doing nothing flashy, but he's not turning the ball over. He's not hurting this team. And arguably in the win over the LA Chargers last weekend, we saw his best game as he seemed to grow at important moments, certainly in the second half, and make key players as he helped the Steelers take down the Chargers last Sunday. And of course, it doesn't hurt you at all when you see the steel curtain defense being reinvented. The Pittsburgh Steelers are the number 1 ranked scoring defense in the NFL this season. They're only giving up an average of 8.7 points per game. That's not even 2 full scores. They're tied number 2 in the National Football League for rush defense, tied alongside the Minnesota Vikings, giving up just 71.3 yards a game on the ground. And their turnover differential is impressive. Through 3 games, they have a +4 turnover differential. That's tied for 3rd in the NFL right now, and that goes a long way to explaining why and how the Steelers have got off to a fantastic start and are currently atop of the AFC North. Their opponents, the Indianapolis Colts, well, they've been a little bit shaky. Of course, their second-year quarterback, Anthony Richardson, earned rave reviews for that impressive touchdown pass he made in Week 1 when he was almost on his knees and then through the air flung the ball 60 yards to find a receiver for the score. But the Colts didn't win that game, and then they were hugely disappointing in their loss to Green Bay in Week 2. They weren't that much more impressive, it has to be said, in taking down the Chicago Bears last weekend. They're scoring 20.7 points per game on average, but their defense, Well, that hasn't been good. Admittedly, it might be skewed a little bit by the shellacking they took at Lambeau Field in the loss to the Green Bay Packers, but they have the 31st ranked defense right now in the NFL. They couldn't stop the run in Green Bay, even when they knew that the Packers weren't really going to throw the ball. They allowed the Packers to run all over them. They concede a lick over 20 points per game through 3 games. You know, there were moments for Caleb Williams last weekend and the Chicago Bears, but ultimately they couldn't get the job done. And of course, you remember that +4 turnover differential I mentioned in favor of the Pittsburgh Steelers? Well, the Colts are -2 in turnover differential. That's in the bottom 10 in the NFL right now. And if your quarterback isn't playing that well and is turning the ball over, as Anthony Richardson has been doing, we saw another horrible interception thrown in the end zone to the Chicago Bears last weekend, and somehow Indy still managed to overcome that type of setback. Then you need your defense to stand up and play well. And it just hasn't been the case so far. That's not to say the Colts won't get better. They may well do so. But this is a tall order against a stingy, miserly, Mike Tomlin-led Pittsburgh Steelers team that have been giving opponents literally nothing through the first 3 weeks of the season. And I've got to tell you as well, you can point to Justin Herbert leaving the game early injured for the Chargers. You can point to Joey Bosa leaving injured in the first half for the Chargers. But the way the Pittsburgh Steelers defense stifled the Chargers and the run game in particular, J.K. Dobbins, who'd run all over the Raiders week 1 and had a big game against Carolina in week 2, he saw no daylight at all. Those holes were shut down by the Steelers defense, and that's in part why I refer to the reinvention of the steel curtain. There was nowhere to go for the Chargers last weekend, and that's against an offense in LA, which I think is going to prove itself to be more than useful this season. Well, now you're going up against an Indianapolis Colts team. Admittedly, you're on the road going into Indy's backyard, but they've given you no reason through the first 3 weeks to hang your hat on their offense. In fact, in some of the decisions that Anthony Richardson's made, it's been quite the opposite. Down there in Tennessee, you've had Will Levis, their quarterback, getting a lot of stick from his head coach and from the media, and rightfully so for game-crushing turnovers he's committed. Well, in Anthony Richardson, it's certainly not been any better. You know, he's been handing the opposition the ball in some of these games. And like I say, it was, you know, it says a lot about his teammates that they found a way to come back and overcome the Bears last weekend. And you can say, well, it's the Bears and they're 0-3. That's true. But they gave Chicago opportunities, and that interception from inside the red zone that was thrown to whom I don't know who he was trying to find for the touchdown pass in the end zone. But the Colts managed to overcome that. They got their first win. The Steelers is a totally different proposition. I'm a little bit surprised, to be honest, that the Steelers are only 1.5 point favourites coming into this game. I get it that their offense isn't exactly lighting up scoreboards, but their defense is a different animal altogether. And I don't see so far from what the Colts have shown us any way they find a way to run up the score on this Steelers D. I'm taking Pittsburgh to complete a 4-0 start to the season, go into Indy, get the W, take the Steelers at -1.5 points.
Graves on Gridiron.
Okay, game 2 of our week 4 triple slate sees the Cleveland Browns go to the Las Vegas Raiders. Were there 2 more disappointing, soul-destroying defeats for teams in week 3? I'm not so sure there were. Jags fans might argue with that, but the Browns got taken down at home by the New York Giants. The Raiders handed their first win of the season to the Carolina Panthers. Let's start by talking about those Las Vegas Raiders, because remember, folks, they were coming off a huge win, a huge come-from-behind road win in Baltimore, not 7 days earlier. Everybody's thinking, okay, we know that Antonio Pierce's side brings a defense. Now we've seen it rally and bring some offense late in the game on the road to take down the much-fancied Baltimore Ravens. Gardner Minshew's found some sort of rapport with Devontae Adams. This is a team that is going to walk through the Carolina Panthers. Well, that didn't happen, did it? In fact, Antonio Pierce, the head coach, came out in his post-game comments and said he felt Flat out, there were business decisions taken on the field by some of their defensive players. And going forward, the organization will be taking business decisions. That is ominous. If I'm a player in the Las Vegas Raiders locker room, I'm a bit concerned and looking over my shoulder because Antonio Pierce isn't the type of guy to say something he doesn't mean. So I expect some sort of bounce back this weekend. I'm not so sure that the odds makers share that opinion. I think they're a little bit more not so sure, hesitant when they make this line because they have the Browns going into Las Vegas as 1-point underdogs. That might be surprising when you consider that Cleveland have had 2 games at home this season and they've lost both of them. So NFC East teams, the Dallas Cowboys in week 1. Well, we've all seen what Dallas has put on tape over the last 2 weeks. And then last weekend, the New York Giants, the hapless, winless New York Giants that not 7 days earlier had lost to the Washington Commanders. Well, they go in, they cough up the ball on the opening kickoff return of the game, allow the Browns to go 7-0 up, and then find a way to come from behind to get a win and hold out the Browns late in the fourth quarter as well. Deshaun Watson, he has not been a help to this Cleveland Browns offense. And I know Browns fans, you'll say, well, look at our offensive line. We're minus our 2 starting tackles. One of those backup tackles left the game early as well last weekend. It's been a free-for-all for opposition defensive players rushing through on the quarterback. But that elusiveness, that strength, that ability to extend plays that we saw Deshaun Watson have when he was a Houston Texan, and is the reason, by the way, that the Cleveland Browns decided to go in there, trade for him, and give him that fully guaranteed $230 million contract. Well, that's not been there this season so far from Deshaun Watson. He looks a little bit hesitant, almost sluggish at times, and he's certainly been inaccurate on occasions when he's throwing the ball. Last weekend, he completed 21 of 37 passing attempts, 2 touchdowns, 196 yards passing through the air. That's not a lot over 50% completion rate against a New York Giants defense that, it's not one of the elite units in the NFL, folks. This New York Giants team has been turning over the ball. They've been losing games. And their fans have been tearing their hair out. And yet you allow this team to come into your home stadium, your backyard, spot you a 7-point lead early in the first quarter, and you allow them to beat you? Look, there are issues in Cleveland with this offense right now. They can't run the ball. Okay, no Nick Chubb. He's still coming back from that injury, which ended his season prematurely last year. But Jerome Ford was good in filling in last season. He couldn't see daylight at all last weekend. Their offense is 31st in the NFL right now, averaging just 16.7 points per game. If you're telling me one of these teams is going to bounce back, one of these teams is going to respond to adversity, one of these teams is going to show you that what we saw in week 3 was an abomination. It was a mistake. It's not that team. I'm not taking the Cleveland Browns to show me that. I'm going to take the team with a head coach who's put his entire locker room on notice that if you're taking business decisions on the field, you better believe we're going to make business decisions off the field. That team is the Las Vegas Raiders. They're back at home in front of their own fans this weekend with a point to prove. The odds makers say they're only 1-point favorites. Well, you watch this team go out and take care of business against the Cleveland Browns. We're taking the Raiders on this show, folks. The Raiders at -1. Okay, we have one more game to look at. It is going to involve the reigning, defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. And we'll look ahead to that game after these short messages.
Graves on Gridiron.
Welcome back to the show. 2 games down, 1 more to preview ahead of week 4 in the NFL. And that third and final game on this week's edition of Graves on Gridiron is the undefeated Kansas City Chiefs, 3-0 to start the season, going into Los Angeles to take on the Chargers, their NFC West rivals. And any other day, prior to last weekend, I'd say we might see some points lighting up the board in this. I love what Coach Harbaugh's doing with his Chargers team so far this season. You know what you're going to get from the Kansas City Chiefs. They have playmakers all over the field, and they find a way to win every game. However, I think the odds makers and I certainly think I've seen enough, suggests that the total points line on this game might be a little lower than we would otherwise anticipate. The line is set at 39 total points for the game, and I think it's going to be a low-scoring game because we've got two of the best defensive units in the NFL on the same field this week. The Chargers are only giving up 11 points per game. The Chiefs are giving up just a fraction under 21 points a game, 20.7 on average. But make no mistake, the main reason the Kansas City Chiefs are 3-0 is because their defensive side of the ball finds a way to close out games. Equally, for the LA Chargers, the reason they're able to play a little bit of bully boy football on offense is because their defense is miserly. It's giving up absolutely nothing. So you look at last weekend's loss to Pittsburgh, they went down by 20 points to 10. There were mitigating circumstances in that. Remember, Justin Herbert was a true game time decision with that dinged up ankle. Well, he got it rolled up on again and had to leave in the third quarter, meaning Taylor Heineke had to come in and replace him. I believe that scores were tied at that point in the game against Pittsburgh. Obviously, we all know what happened then with the Steelers going on to win the game. Will he be fit to take to the field this weekend? Well, trust me, Justin Herbert is nothing if he is not tough. And if there is any way he can get on the field, he will do so. But even in that capacity, there's obviously question marks about just how fit he's going to be. Perhaps a bit more concerning for the LA Chargers is the fact that star pass rusher Joey Bosa also left the field early in Pittsburgh last weekend with a hip injury. He did not return. It remains to be seen what his status is going into week 4. And they're going to be without star safety Derwin James as well, who's been suspended for one game by the NFL after he was once again found guilty of lowering the helmet and contacting an opposition player. So he won't be taking part, subject to any appeal that may or may not be coming going into week 4. On the positive side, for the LA Chargers, they do go into this game with a top 10 rushing offense. They're averaging 252 yards on the ground. J.K. Dobbins, a big reason for that. We spoke about him last weekend on the show. Back-to-back games to open the season, rushing for over 100 yards. He was shut down by the Steelers' defense last week. Is the Chiefs' defense quite as good against the run as the Steelers? Possibly not. So, potentially, a big moment, a big game, a big role to play for J.K. Dobbins. The Chargers have only averaged 19 points per game, which is a little bit of a concern. But again, when you consider that they only scored 10 points last weekend, through 3 weeks, am I overly concerned? No, not at all. It's how they managed to fill in or how they managed to utilize Justin Herbert if he is good to go on the field. And if he's not, it's Taylor Heineke's game. Well, what can they do with him? But it's going to be relying heavily on the run. And that, again, suggests to me that we're looking at a low-scoring game because they're coming up against the Chiefs' defense that once again came up big in Atlanta on Sunday Night Football, limiting the Falcons to 17 points in that game. 2 big fourth-quarter stops made against the Falcons when the home team were marching into the red zone in that game. And let's go for it on 4th down. The Chiefs turned them away. There's no way of getting around it, folks. Once again, Kansas City has not been as impressive as you would expect on offense. One of those reasons is that star tight end Travis Kelce, frankly, just hasn't got going so far this season. He has 8 total catches for 69 yards, no TDs. He has gone off, though, against these LA Chargers in SoFi Stadium in his career previously. It's only a matter of time before he and Patrick Mahomes link up again. I'm convinced of that. But so long as the Chiefs' offense is lacking that deep threat, it means that the opposition can just tighten that space and close down on players like Travis Kelce. And to this point, okay, you can look and say, well, the Chiefs have Rashee Rice, they have Xavier Worthy, and yes, we've seen both those players make big plays in the first 3 weeks of the season, but both those players have got receptions of short or intermediate passes. There's not one of them has taken the top off an opposition defense so far and stretched the field. So that is going to be something that I think until it happens, the Chargers defense aren't going to be scared of. Especially when you look at the defenses that the Chiefs have come up against as well through 3 weeks. The Ravens, the Bengals, the Falcons. Well, We saw even Dallas throw all over the Ravens defense late in the game last weekend. The Bengals, well, Jaden Daniels had his way with that Bengals secondary on Monday Night Football. And the Falcons, well, they might be the best of that trio, but they still allowed the Kansas City Chiefs to make plays. And the other thing that leads me to think that this might be low scoring is Isaiah Pacheco, the running back for the Kansas City Chiefs. Once again, he's still sidelined with injury. He won't be taking part in this game. So do I expect it to be a close affair? You bet. Do I expect it to be one of the more entertaining games? Well, for the purist that likes hard-fought physical football, then yeah, it will be. If you like to see quarterbacks slinging the ball around, finding receivers, running up points on the board, this isn't the game for you, folks. So look at that total points mark. 39 is the line set. Take the under. We're going to take the under. We're expecting fewer than 39 points in this game between the Chiefs and the Chargers. Okay, just to recap then, the 3 games looking ahead to week 4 of this week's NFL action. The Steelers and the Colts take the Steelers to maintain their undefeated record at minus 1.5. Then we're going to Las Vegas. The Browns are going to roll the dice going against the Raiders. They will not leave up on that trip. They're going to be losing, and I think the Raiders win it by covering -1. Take the Raiders at -1. And then we finish up with an NFC West rivalry game as the Chiefs go into Los Angeles to take on the Chargers. This is going to be a hard-fought physical battle. Take the under for total points. Fewer than 39 points to be scored in this game. Once again, let me remind you, it's all about enjoyment, having a bit of fun to go along with your weekend NFL action. If you want to hit me up, then do so on social media. We're on Graves on Gridiron on Facebook, RDG Media UK on Instagram, at Richard Graves 1 on X. Equally, go to my website if you want to read a bit more detail about these 3 games we're previewing this week. That's www.rdgmedia.uk. Click on that Talking Sport tab, and then NFL Week 4 Overcoming the Odds. You'll see all 3 games spoken about in a bit more detail as we put some meat on the bones going into Week 4. As always, it's been a blast, folks. Can't wait for this week's action. What's in store? Well, given what we've seen in the first 3 weeks, frankly, who knows? But let's look forward to it. For now, so long, everybody.
Subscribe to Graves on Gridiron wherever you listen to podcasts. And keep up to date with the latest on Twitter. Search for Richard Graves 1. That's Richard Graves, the number 1.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.